We stand tall? Can't we know that we're forgiven? Don't we have a lot to try for? The gospel message of God's unconditional redeeming love is the fundamental basis of high self-esteem. When we value ourselves and others just for our own sake, and we're not trying to find any advantage that we can gain by valuing somebody else. We're doing it because that's what God intends for us to do. For the first few months of her life, Helen Keller was a perfectly normal little baby. Then disease took away her hearing. Disease took away her sight. And by the time Annie Sullivan arrived to be her teacher, Helen Keller was kind of like a caged animal. Folks in her family dubbed her the Panther or the Phantom because of the way she hovered around the house. She lurked around the house. But through the miracle of incredible patience and incredible love and devotion, Annie Sullivan was able to break through and establish human communication with Helen Keller. And if we know the story of Helen Keller, we know that it means to move from non-existent, shattered, or negative self-image to a wonderful awareness of ourselves as beautiful creations of God. Beautiful creations of God. To be reminded of Helen Keller's story is to be reminded that we can look through and beyond the evil in our lives, the shadow in our lives, the wrongdoing in our lives. We can look through all of that to the glorious possibilities that are there, that are inherent in our status as children of God. And that's the God whose name is revealed in the dramatic episode that George read about at the bush and is best translated as, I will be what I will be, or I am who I am. You take your choice. To come into that living relationship with this God, the God of all being and the God of all becoming, is the ultimate impossibility thinking. You know, we got used to a number of years ago with Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and the power of what? Positive thinking. But remember Matthew. Matthew puts it very simply when he says, with God, all things are possible. Possibility thinking. So, just as Moses was in many respects the father of God's people, Israel, even so, the author of the earliest gospel, and that would be Mark, he was the first one to capture this message about Jesus. And that message is evil demons do lurk in the hearts of man and woman, but God's stronger. Pain, evil, suffering are there. They're in the shadows. But God is in the center of things, right in the middle. The shadows are on the edge. They're peripheral, if you will. But with God's help, we can face our shadows and we can keep them from getting a hold of us, from getting the upper hand on who we are. We can have a positive self-image, and we can believe that with God, all things are possible. I end with something that is so trite and so banal, and yet I use it frequently, and I remember it from church camp sometime many, many years ago. And it's about the power of a positive self-image. And it's to repeat the story of a young African-American boy years ago who was exposed to prejudiced taunts, to bigoted stupidity, And he would shout back at those who were picking on him, "What you say about me is not true, because God made me." And he finishes that statement, "And God don't make no junk." And we've heard that. And that's a line that all of us, at some point in our lives, need to apply to ourselves. You and I, and this is the good news for this morning, are made in the image of God. There's no getting around it. And yes, we have sinned. We have gone astray. But all we did was become like junk. We didn't become junk. Sometimes our shadows threaten to overcome us and engulf us. But God, in His grace and in His love, has redeemed us and has bought us back and brought us back from that junk heap through the cross and through the resurrection of His Son, Jesus. And He has restored our original beauty and our original goodness. So, rather than saying that we are excused from fulfilling God's great expectations for us because we're not worth much, God excuses us in a way that restores our worth. God excuses us in a way that restores our self-esteem. And we are reminded every day to say, just like that little African-American boy said so long ago, folks, God didn't and don't make no junk. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.